Ted the Caver. March 23rd, 2001. Due to the overwhelming number of requests I've received to tell about my discoveries and bizarre experiences in a cave not far from my home, I've created this webpage. I will outline the events that happened to me during this past few months, beginning with my journey into a familiar cave in December 2000 and ending... well, it hasn't actually ended yet. I'll use my caving journal as the text to tell about my recent experience. I'll give them to you as I experience them, in chronological order. I've included photographs that were taken during my many trips into the cave. I've also created a few illustrations to help the reader get a better idea of what the things looked like in the cave. All of the photos were taken by me or one of the few people I went into the cave with. I want to point out a few things before I tell any of this. Number 1. Most of the pictures were taken on a Kodak disposable type camera. I took a better camera into the cave on 1 or 2 of the trips. The pictures you see are all original photos that have not been messed with or enhanced, other than when noted. As a rule, I get my pictures put onto a disc at the time of developing so I don't have to scan them later. This ensures the best digital quality. Number 2. I will not reveal names of the people involved in this experience. If you know me well enough, you probably know them already. Number 3. I will not reveal the location of the cave to anyone for any reason, so please don't ask. I refuse to be held accountable for anyone's life but my own. I will refer to the cave as Mystery Cave. That is not its real name. If you think these events sound far-fetched, I agree. I would come to the same conclusion had I not experienced them. I will try to finish the site as soon as possible. Check the date on the main page to see when I've made updates. To protect myself from people who might want to copy this site, I include the following. All text on this and following pages are my own words and copyright 2001. Ted. Caving Journal. December 30th, 2000. B and I decided to get in one more caving trip before the new year, so we set our sights on Mystery Cave. Not a spectacular cave, but since neither of us had been caving for a while, it'd be nice to go into any cave. There was a bit of excitement to this trip. There was a small passage in the lower portion of the cave that I wanted to check out to see if it was possible to get past it. It had a small opening, but lots of air billowing out of it. Even though it's way too small to climb through, I'd never even checked to see what was inside the passage. We got our gear loaded up and hit the road by 3 p.m. We got to the cave in great time, since B likes to drive fast. We anchored from the usual tree and began to rappel into the cave. I went down first and got my gear together while B came down. I will be referring to B many times. We've been caving together for many months now. He was injured in a caving accident a few years ago and was told he would never walk again. Through hard work and perseverance, he not only walks but can get around very well in caves. The trickier parts of the cave might slow him down a bit, but he can make it. He patiently works through an obstacle until he gets past it. As for the reference to the small opening in the cave, there's a saying amongst cavers. If it blows, it goes. Meaning if a passage has a good flow of air, it's probably worth investigating. After we explored all of the usual passages, we climbed down to check out the hole. The hole is located deep in the cave, near the lowest part of the cave. It's on the side of a cave wall, about 3 feet from the floor. To look inside the hole, I had to kneel down and duck under a overhanging rock. I used my backup mini mag light and held it inside of the hole to see what I could see. I was excited by what I saw. The wall around the hole was about 3 to 5 inches thick. It led into a tight passage. The passage opened up a bit just inside of the hole. It continued back about 10 to 12 feet in the small crawl space. After that, it seemed to really open up, although how much we couldn't tell. This could be a virgin passage. Obviously, no one has passed through this route, but there could be a way into the small passage on the other side. To even get into the crawl space, we would have to enlarge the opening. Currently, it's about the size of my fist. After we get past the opening, we'd have a tight crawl back to where it opened up. It would take some work, but we thought we could do it. We sat down for a few minutes to rest and contemplate our plan of attack. Whilst we sat there in the darkness, we could hear the wind howling from the other side of the passage. It was a low, eerie noise. We could also hear a low rumble from time to time. No big deal, though. The cave is in the vicinity of a highway that has very heavy trucks driving on it. We figured the rumble was an effect of the trucks resonating through the rocks. We determined that our best plan would be to haul a cordless drill into the cave and drill into the rock. Then we could take a bullpen and a small sledgehammer to break up the rock. It seemed pretty straightforward. We would widen the hole big enough to squeeze in and see what was on the other side. The efforts to haul all of the equipment down into the hole would be a pain, but we hoped it would be worth it. I named the passage Floyd's Tomb, after Floyd Collins. It seemed to look like the tight spot where Floyd spent the rest of his miserable days on Earth. Floyd Collins was a caver back in the early 1900s. He got stuck in a tight crawl space and was unable to free himself. It's an amazing story that's detailed in a book called Trapped, the story of Floyd Collins. I think that was the title, I don't recall the author. Calling our passage Floyd's Tomb was not only a tribute to Floyd, but a commentary on the size of the passage. In retrospect, it's funny how simple I thought it was going to be. I figured a few hours of work and we'd be in. Had I known how long it was actually going to take, I doubt I would have even begun the project. Had I known what I was going to experience in the cave, I never would have returned. We gathered up our gear and headed for the surface. Normally, I couldn't care less if I ever came back to this cave. There's nothing special about it, but now I was psyched about getting back and going through. We hadn't even left our cave and were planning our return trip. The rest of the journal entry talked about the climb out of the cave, our dinner, and our trip back home. January 27th to 28th, 2001. B and I were both excited to get back into the cave and get to work. I figured with about 4 hours of work we'd be in and see what's on the other side. We had arranged to borrow a DeWalt cordless drill and bring it with us. We also had masonry bits to drill with, sledgehammers, too, to break up the rock, bullpins to insert into the drill holes, and a few other tools that we ended up not using. Getting the tools down to the work site proved to be a challenge. One of us would climb down the rope and stop at a ledge or a good resting place, then the other person would lower the tools. We kept repeating this routine until we got to the bottom of the cave. Then we had to drag the tools into the hole. It took about an hour to finally get to work. B took the first turn at the hole. After an hour of exhausting work, we could tell that we were not going to get through in one session. We kept trading off after we worked ourselves into a sweat. One would take a break and get some food and water whilst the other went to work. The routine went like this. To begin work, we had to get down to our knees and do our best to avoid smacking our heads on the ceiling. Working in this awkward position, we would drill into the wall around the hole. That was difficult work. We had to really push on the drill, and it was still slow progress. Then we inserted the bullpen into the hole and hammered on it until the rock broke up. Then we would repeat the process. To give you an idea of how slow it went, the typical size of the rock that would break off was about the size of a fingernail. If we broke off the large piece, about 1/3 the size of my palm, it was a cause for celebration. From time to time, for variety, we would just wail on a cold chisel with a 5-pound sledge. It was slow progress. The problem with the sledge was that we couldn't take a good swing because of the tight quarters. Even though we spent many hours and several trips working on the hole, we never did find a better technique for widening the hole. The drill, bullpen, hammer got the best results of our efforts. We came up with some crazy ideas for breaking up the rock, everything from TNT, never seriously considered, to hauling a generator to the mouth of the cave and running an extension cord down to a jackhammer. We even thought about using liquid nitrogen to freeze the rock and make it more brittle. After a couple of hours of hard work, we realized what our limiting factor was going to be. It was then our first battery met an abrupt death. We had a second battery, so we swapped them out. The second battery lasted a little longer because we hammered and chiseled a little more often and a little longer each time. Finally, after about 3 more hours of drudgery, the second battery died, and we called it a night. Phew. You could tell we had done some work in the cave, but it wasn't that much. For the first time since we got in the cave, we sat back, the both of us took a break. It was nice to check out the result of our hard work. Then we noticed the howling again. It seemed to be a little louder than last time we were there. We just figured the wind was blowing a little stronger outside. What we could not figure out was the rumbling. It, too, seemed to be louder and more frequent. This time we could not attribute the noise to trucks. The road that trucks drove on was not very busy to begin with. At that time of night, it should be dead. Yet the rumbling continued. It seemed to be coming from deep within the passage. B said he would ask some veteran cavers what the noise could be. We didn't spend a long time admiring our work. We still had to haul our gear up out of the cave. Actually, we left some of it in the cave. It was still difficult work. What made it worse was that we were both exhausted. Our original plan was to be done with this cave and hit a couple other caves the next day. Instead, we decided to crash at a nearby motel, charge up the drills, and go back to the mystery cave. My journal goes on at length about the night after we left the cave. We got a room. Dinner was excellent. I didn't sleep good, despite the fact I was exhausted, etc. We both slept in, so we got a late start back into the cave. The second day working on the cave went about the same as the first. We worked until both batteries were dead again. We were still not even close to getting through. The howling and rumbling continued as the day before. On caving. Before I continue with the next journal entry, I thought it might be helpful to the reader to explain a little about caving and about the atmosphere in the cave. As I reread and thought about my description of the cave, I noticed that much of the language I used in my caving journal, and the descriptions, or lack thereof, assume that the reader has a knowledge of caving and what it is like inside of a cave. In other words, I write my journals for me. I'll take this time to give a more detailed description of the cave. I will tell about what it's like whilst we work on the cave, and I'll summarize our feelings to this point. The cave was discovered several decades ago whilst construction in the area unearthed its entrance. From that time to the present, it has been visited by mostly locals in the area and avid cavers in the region. Beer cans can be found intermittently in the cave, mostly in the upper half. When the cave was first entered, it was probably beautiful. Dust, graffiti, vandals, pigeons, and regular use of the cave has diminished its appeal. There are still places in the cave where small formations remain undisturbed, as a reminder of what the rest of the cave used to look like. To enter the cave, one must have a good length of rope, in order to rappel down into the rock. A nearby tree serves as a good anchor point. Once the rope is tied to the tree, about 20 feet away from the small cliff, it can be tossed over the edge of the cliff, to a small ledge about 15 feet below. Cavers can then descend the short distance to the entrance. Once inside the cave, artificial light must be used. My light source of choice is a battery-operated helmet-mounted light, known as a tag light. Safe caving calls for at least 2 sources of backup lighting. For my backup lighting, I have a mini mag light mounted to my helmet, and another helmet-mounted light in my backpack, which I always carry with me. I also have glow sticks that I carry with me. These are not considered good sources of backup light by some, but they are good to use for taking lunch breaks, and they could be used to get out of the cave if other sources fail. After a short climb over large rocks, the caver comes to a large pit. The same rope is used to reach the bottom of the pit. The drop is only 50 feet or so, but is not free hanging. In other words, you can slide straight down the rope, which is preferable. You have to snake your way past some sharp rocks as you descend. The ascent is made more difficult by the same reason. The pit varies in diameter from about 10 feet to 3 or 4 in a few places. The walls are lined with sharp white rock called popcorn. Let me correct that. It used to be white, but is now covered with dust and dirt that was kicked down from above by years of caving. The popcorn makes it painful to brush against the side of the pit. My choice of clothing is Levi's, t-shirt, gloves, and knee pads. I usually leave the cave with a few scrapes, but at least I'm comfortable whilst I climb around inside. The temperature is stable year-round. It feels cool in the summer and warm in the winter. We've gone in on freezing days, and about 10 feet into the cave it's warm enough that coats are not needed. It's a good temperature to work in, as we learned. For this size drop, I usually use a figure-8 descending device. For the climbing up, I attach myself to a rope using a pencil ascender, but I climb up on my own without using the device. It's merely a safety attachment in case I slip. Other cavers have their own preferred methods of getting up and down. At the bottom of the drop, the caver gets to do some crawling for a while. There is a small room about 6 by 6 feet at the bottom that gives the caver a spot to leave their harness and descend ascending gear. Since there are no more steep drops, the harness is not really needed, it will only get in the way. Once the caver gets down to the 6 by 6 room, they can take a break under the ledge whilst the rest of the party comes down. Then they must drop to their knees to negotiate a 10-foot passage that is only a few feet high. This is where the knee pads come in handy. The floor is covered with soft dirt, mitigating the bits of broken rock from the above. The thin layer of dirt does nothing to soften the blow to the hands and knees as the caver works down the crawl space. As a reward, at the end of the crawl, they get to drop to their belly and scoot under a tight squeeze. Not really tight, just something low enough to make the caver scoot along in the dirt. Once the caver gets to the other side of the squeeze, there is a few feet of crawl space. Then the cave opens up enough to stand. For most of the rest of the caver can stand, or at least stoop. The cave splits into several passages at this point. 2 routes wind around rocks and crevices, and come to abrupt dead ends. The other 2 lead to small pools of water. Each route is fun to explore. They all lead on for hundreds of feet or so in a gradual downward slope. Most of the time, the caver can walk upright in the passage. Other times, they will have to climb over large boulders or occasionally crawl on hands and knees. Water is a common occurrence in the caves. I've been told by one of the local residents that one of the first people in the cave, and that his cousin, dove into the pools using scuba gear. He said that the cave continued down for a couple hundred feet underwater. What they were hoping for, and what happens frequently, is that the passage comes up somewhere else, the Virgin Cave passage, to explore. Unfortunately, I don't possess the knowledge to give more detail about the rocks in the cave. When we were drilling, we would have some parts that were easier to drill than others. And there are different colors in the rock. Refer to the photos I've taken in the cave. But that's the best I can do to describe the makeup of the cave. At the point, the cave splits into 4 routes. The 2 dead-end passages are to the immediate left of the caver. Straight ahead and to the right are the passages that lead to the pools of water. The entrance to the passage on the right is the largest of the 4. The arched opening rises nearly 10 feet in the air, ending a mere foot below the cave ceiling. As the caver enters the passage, the ceiling gradually lowers until it's about 6 feet high. It continues at the same height for the 40 feet that the passage travels in a continuous direction. This section of the cave resembles a rock mine. It's arched nearly perfect, and the floor flat and easy to walk on. It's easy to picture rusty mine cars on rail lines, and dust-covered miners with blistered hands gripping dull picks. The pseudo-mine comes to an end, and the caver is once again forced to drop down on hands and knees and get reacquainted with the floor of the cave. This time the crawl lasts about 20 feet. The floor is sloping gently downward for the first half of the crawl. Then it gets fairly steep and slippery. Able-bodied cavers can still climb carefully down the slippery slope. When I go with B, I carry the end of the rope that we used to get down at this point. I usually need to tie another short length of the rope to the first rope to make sure that he can use it to reach the bottom. The crawl lasts a few feet beyond the bottom of the slide. Over the next 10 to 12 feet, the caver slowly begins to regain the standing position. After walking a few feet and climbing down a short drop-off, the caver arrives at a small level area, which has a passage leading down immediately to the left. The passage ends 75 feet after one of the small bodies of water. To the right is a rock wall. Straight ahead is an indentation of the wall which goes back about 3 feet. On the wall at the rear of the indent is a small hole, about the size of a softball. To get near the hole, the caver needs to duck under an overhang and kneels upon a rock that rises above the floor by a few inches. By the time the caver reaches this point, they are either warm or sweating, and the first thing they notice is the cool breeze blowing out of the hole. It was my recognition of this hole as a potential doorway to an unexplored portion of the cave that ultimately led me to this telling of my experience. As has been my tradition for all the years I've been caving, the party reaches a point in the cave, usually at the deepest part of the cave, that all lights are extinguished. Complete blackness fills the eyes. For a moment, the individual caver strains the eye's muscles, focusing in and out with the expectation of catching a crumb of light somewhere in the false night. After several futile moments, the caver turns their head at a sound, perhaps another caver, only to have the other senses return, and then heightened. The sounds, smells, and feelings that have been overlooked to this point come racing to the caver in perfect detail. The pain of their own behind sitting on the cave floor, the smell of dust, sweat, guano, the sound of modern material shifting on age-old rock as cavers attempt to find comfort on this solid foundation. At the back of every caver's mind at this time is, what if? What if a person had to climb out this cave using no light? Would they make it? Would they find all the turns and bends which got them to this place? If not, would a rescue party come to find them? The depth of darkness recognized at this time is something that I rarely experienced outside of a cave. Many first-time cavers erroneously declare that they have to hold their hand to within 2 to 3 inches of their face before they can see it. The truth is, the human eye is incapable of seeing in the absence of light. If they did not hear something coming towards them, they would feel it before they saw it. Complete and total dark. This experience is a great way to remind people to take backup lighting. As we proceeded to work in the cave, we developed a system pretty early and little changed in succeeding trips. The first time in the cave, B took the first shift at chipping away at the opening. After half an hour, he needed to take a break, so I took over. He told me what worked best, and I continued doing the same. We would try new things from time to time, to use new muscles, but usually stuck to the same method. We would use the masonry bit and press on the drill as hard as we could, and drill out a hole in the rock. Safety glasses and dust masks were worn whilst working. Then we would insert the bullpen and hammer into the rock and break out small chunks of the cave. Then we would drill another hole and repeat the process. Occasionally the drill would hit a soft spot in the rock and that step would be shortened. We would work until we became too tired to continue. Then B and I would trade. While one of us was working, the other would remain in the dark and either eat or drink, or just lay down on the cave floor, padded by rope bags. After just a few rotations, we were tired enough to catch a nap whilst taking our break. The only light we used was the helmet light on the head of the worker. Since it was pointing towards the hole, the resting person was left mostly in the dark. This was a welcome benefit, since the resting person was usually, resting. The rest break was also a chance to cool down a bit, which didn't take long in the cool temperature of the cave. Fortunately, the temperature of the cave allowed us to work pretty hard and not overheat much. I remember that I frequently looked at the hole and thought, hey, it's big enough, I think I can squeeze through, only to be disappointed in my attempt. However, even after the first attempt and failure, I knew that I would keep working on the hole until I got through. This despite the fact that I knew it would take many more hours of hard work. It actually became an obsession with me. I tried to get out to the cave and work as often as I could. I hoped that the passage led to a larger, undiscovered cave that we would be the first to enter. I guess the explorer in me wanted to find a new frontier there was in the cave. Since B is such an avid caver, he was motivated by the same desire to find a new unexplored cave. What we did find was not at all what I expected.